guys, so today we're going to do a paint review video. This is a paint that I've actually used for a long time. It is not one that I use as frequently as I used to, and that is for no other reason than I have found other paints that just kind of have been working with my projects and that I work well with. But this has been in my cabinet for a while. It is a staple around here in my workshop, and it's a great overall paint. So I figured, let's do a review on it. So what paint am I talking about? I'm talking about the Sloan chalk paint. And yes, we all know Annie Sloan. She is one of the originators of actual chalk paint. Been around for a long time, and I figured it would be kind of fun to do a review video for those of you that are new or have not used very many different paints. It's always good to check out what paints are good, check out different people's reviews, and this is a very popular brand. So I thought I'd go ahead and give you guys a review, my opinion. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm gonna turn the camera down so that we can put this on a practice board together and talk about the paint. Okay, right, guys, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's get our practice board going. So I'm gonna tip the camera down here so you guys can actually see my board. One thing with Annie paint that I will tell you is really important. This is a brand new can. So when you have a brand new can, make sure that you always stir it, shake it, do whatever you need to do. It can be quite thick, and I want to show you guys on camera the consistency. This is a little bit thicker than some of the other paints that I have reviewed before, so when you dig in, always make sure that you give it a really good thorough stir or shaking. I'm going to tip the camera down a little bit more so that you guys can see my board a little bit better. There we go. And let's go ahead and get this first coat on. As usual, we are using one of my primed practice boards, I call them. It's actually crown molding that's been cut into 12-inch pieces. And I'm using my handy Klingon brush. It is one of the only brushes that I use because it just, no matter what paint I choose, it tends to give the best finish. The color we're using today is one of her new neutrals. It just came out yesterday. It is called Chicago Gray. It's very similar to her Paris Gray. The Paris Gray had a little more kind of a blue hue to it in the gray, and this does not. So this is a really pretty color. It really looks very similar to some of the other colors in the paint lines that I use very frequently. So let's talk about how this paint goes on. It's a little different than some of the paints that I've reviewed before, in the fact that chalk paint tends to be a little thicker and it goes on a little drier, if that makes sense. You cannot work it as much or as long as some of the other paints like General Finishes or Fusion. It just has a completely different texture. So here is, it almost looks white on camera, that's so funny. But here is our first coat. The first coat goes on very nicely. But you can feel when you're working with that first coat that it does feel, the best way to describe it is it may drag a little bit. So I'm going to tip the camera back up so that we can talk about this a little bit. So it does tend to have a little bit of drag. And what do I mean by that? It's just not as smooth. It's a little bit drier. Chalk paint is a little bit kind of like a drier formula, if you will. So what I recommend for this is to put on your first coat. Do not try to get all the coverage. If you miss a few spots, that's okay. You'll pick that back up on your second or third coat. One thing about the chalk paint that's a little different too is that it's really easy to sand, which is really awesome. That's one of the things that why I would use chalk paint versus maybe some of the other acrylic milk paints that I use, because if I'm doing a project that I want to distress, chalk paint is the way to go. Annie, you can mix and match all of her colors. I mean, you can make your own custom colors, as you kind of can with any paint line. But she has, I think it's about 42 colors in her line. And so they can be mixed and matched. She has some beautiful colors that you can just right out of the can. But like I said, when you're laying down your first coat, keep in mind that it may tend to feel a little bit like it's dragging. So just continue with your strokes, nice long easy strokes, and keep in mind that the coverage is not going to be there on your first coat. You may miss a few. The best thing to do is stop, because you want the best finish, and overworking will give you not the best finish. So let's go ahead and let this dry. The other thing that I will mention is that this paint dries pretty darn fast. I believe it's the same as most of the other paints, but I do notice that it does set up a lot faster. I would say in about 20 minutes, this practice board is going to be ready for us to come back and take a look at how our first coat looks, and then we can go ahead and apply our second coat. So I will be back. Okay guys, so we're back. The first coat is completely dry. Like I thought, it's about 20 minutes. This little practice board, keep in mind, I say this all the time, but keep in mind practice boards will dry faster, obviously, than an entire piece of furniture. So don't go back over it too soon. Make sure you read the label. I always suggest 1 to 2 hours and go 2 hours as a precaution to make sure, because weather conditions do alter the way pieces will dry, and you don't want to reapply too soon or you'll pull up that first layer of paint. So let me show you guys the first coat. This is the first coat down. It is really, really nice and smooth. It does feel chalky, as it should. So I'm going to show you guys something too that you can do with the Annie Sloan paint in between coats. They make these, Annie actually makes these different sanding pads in a coarse, medium, and fine. And typically when I use a chalk paint, I like a super smooth finish, as smooth as I can get. So if there's any ridges or any brush strokes or anything got into my paint, I like to give it a quick sand in between my coats. Now you can do this with any paint, but especially Annie. And so basically all I do is I just take my sanding pad here, this is the fine one, and I just kind of rub it back and forth. Now this will create a super smooth, it will eliminate any of those ridges that were formed, or like I said, brush strokes, or just the fact that you don't like the feel of it. Now this is ultra smooth and ready for its second coat. I find that with her paint, doing this in between coats also helps it lay down better for your next layer. So let's go ahead and tip the camera down and we'll do our second layer. Okay, so we are gonna go ahead and get our second coat on here. This is plenty dry. I've sanded it so it's super smooth. And one of the things I wanted to tell you about painting with Annie Sloan paint too, I mentioned it earlier that this paint can tend to be a little on the thick side, and so you can absolutely water this paint down. You can do it several ways. You can have your brush dipped in water and have that wet. You can have a spray bottle and get that wet, your piece wet that way, or you can actually mix water right into the paint. I don't typically do it in these small jars or even the large jars. I'll pour it out into a different container if I'm going to do it that way and thin it out. You can absolutely do that. As a matter of fact, I almost recommend doing that. It will help your coats go on nice and smooth and even and not drag along. So let's talk about this second coat. How is this going on? Well, I can tell you normally you guys watch me and I will make several passes at the piece. I have got to stop. This is as much as I can work with this. It does tend to drag a little bit. That is normal with this paint. If you're new to it, it does take a little bit to get used to, but it's kind of letting you know it's time to stop. So when you feel that drag or you feel the fact that it's not, going on as smoothly, you either need to water down or you need to stop what you're doing. So this is our second coat that I've gone ahead and put on. I have not put any water on it, and as a matter of fact, I am going to, so let me grab my water cup. Well, as a matter of fact, I've got a spray bottle out here, so we're just gonna do this. I'm gonna spray down the piece a little bit and show you guys. Now, my brush is literally ready to go slide off into the abyss because this makes it so much nicer to work with. So if you're new to this paint or you haven't done this before with her paint, I would highly, highly recommend it. It just tends to make everything go on so much nicer. So That is our finished second coat. I'm much happier with that I gave it some water, and it's allowing it to be a little bit smoother. We're gonna go ahead and let that set up and dry. This should take about another 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll be back to look at the final finished product, and we'll talk a little bit more about the paint. All right, you guys, so that's it. We are at the end of the video. We have our second coat on. I'm gonna show you a real up close, as you can see. Really, really nice finish. It is smooth as butter. It really doesn't have a sheen like when I've showed you guys some of my other review videos and we look at the final coat. This is pretty flat, but that's what chalk paint is. So if you are expecting to get something different, chalk paint probably is not the paint for you. It's extra smooth because I sanded in between coats, so I definitely recommend that. So let's go ahead and recap. The Annie paint, I think overall is a great paint. A couple of things that you have to learn if you're going to work with it. One is the consistency. I would say that can be a problem for some people. So what I recommend is what I showed you guys when I applied the second coat. Either have a spray bottle of water, dip your brush in water, or just thin out the paint, because it does have a thicker consistency and will tend to drag on that second coat. I have had many people ask me when using this paint for the first time if that's normal, that their first coat went on beautifully and then on their second coat they noticed issues, and it will leave drag marks and brush strokes in your paint. So to alleviate that, you want to use that water. That will make you have the most flawless second or third coat, whatever you're choosing, and sand in between. And you know, that sanding in between, it may seem like a huge extra step. It's really not. I mean, I literally took this super fast, did a quick buff with that sanding pad, and voila, it was done. So those sanding pads, those ones that I showed, or the one I used was an Annie pad. You can get any 220 grit sanding pad, and make sure you don't use 220 grit sanding paper. That's rougher. You want the pads, so they're a lot softer. So that's a great way. So overall, it's a great paint. They have over 42 colors. They're very easy to work with. They come in 2 sizes, and I don't believe their price point is really any worse than anybody else's as far as a furniture paint goes. They're all pretty competitive. This small guy here is $13.99. They did just recently change, well, I don't know how recent, but they did just change their packaging. These smaller guys used to come in the jars with the twist tops. I actually like this better. It's a little bit easier to keep it clean and not stick. So this one's $13.99. I believe the larger one is like $28.99 or something like that. A little goes a long way. I barely used any of this for 2 coats. I mean, it's like it's a brand new can. So the coverage is excellent on Annie. 2 coats and I'm done. It does have to be sealed. So that to some might be a negative or a con. You do have to seal it. If you don't seal it, you're just gonna end up with a mess. Wax, they carry a line of wax. I have used it many times. It's a great finish. It is buildable, and it is definitely the last step, so you don't want to do anything after you wax. You can also use different lines if you want to use like a polyacrylic, which is a water-based sealer. I use that all the time on all different lines of paint, so you can definitely do that as well, but you have to seal this paint. So this is not just kind of a one-step paint or an all-in-one paint. Definitely need a sealer. So all in all, it's still a wonderful paint after all these years. I think it was 4 years ago, I did my first piece, and this is the paint I used. And I wasn't disappointed then, and I'm not disappointed again now doing a review for you guys. If you're new to it, try it, check it out. Just keep in mind there's a few things that will help you. The sanding pad, the water, a good brush. The dry time is standard with any of the other, actually I think this dries a little bit faster than some of the other acrylic water-based milk paints that I use. This tends to dry pretty quick. It's very easily sandable. So that's one of the great things about working with this paint. If you've got a project where you're going to distress, this is the paint to use. It distresses so easily and so nicely. It sands down so fast. So this is a great paint for that type of project as well. So there you go, Annie Sloan in a nutshell. If you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to leave them below in the comments section, and I definitely will get back to you. It is a paint that I still use after all these years, and I probably always will. So thank you guys today for joining me. I appreciate your following. Please pass me along to your friends and family and whoever else might be interested. I certainly do appreciate that as well. And thank you for being a subscriber. Keep on subscribing, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.